Yo, dogs, what's up? It is I, your one and only Brazil. Um, so this is what I've been working on over the past 2, 3 weeks or so. Basically, having bodies of blocks that function in the same way as the main land, on the same level as those, but can rotate around and spin in the world. So yeah, these are basically nearly identical in function to the actual ground around me, and once I get to where I can actually edit blocks and cause things to change, these will be just as changeable. This is fairly complex. I'm still dealing with bugs and issues, and that's why I've taken so long with this update, is because what I'm trying to do is really complicated, or at least an upfront cost. There's a little bit of long-term cost involved with it too, I would say. But I'm still kind of figuring out my approach, and of the two approaches I can take with positioning, if an object considers itself to be in the coordinate space of a planet, do I give each planet, basically, do I give each object a relative coordinate relative to its planet, or an absolute coordinate in terms of like a large area? And right now I'm doing relative, and it makes rendering really complicated. I'm still hammering out issues, and I've done some things just so I can get the video running, but this is progress. Yeah. So frame rate's taken a little bit of a hit with some of the new features. Probably not nearly as big a feature as the smooth lighting. I already had lighting kind of supported in a way, but I was just using Perlin/simplex noise to fill in that lighting. But it was being rendered and everything. It wasn't in RAM yet. And so it's now taking up more memory on the computer. Addressing RAM issues is still something to do in the long term, but at the end of the day, it's more a matter of you only need chunks in memory when you want to do stuff with them. The meshes that I generate from chunks in order to draw stuff on the screen are way smaller in memory, and so ideally I can just be rendering all this stuff but not necessarily have every chunk be loaded. So that's kind of where we are in terms of memory. You can see it's going up. I'm like over 8 gigs because I left it running for a while. Yeah, so definitely this is in need of optimization. I'm hitting like anywhere from 20 to 15 FPS right about now. I bet if I look at everything, I'll hit like 10 or something because it's just not optimized yet. So yeah, it's not bad. I was getting 10 earlier. Yeah, and so you can see that these guys are using the LOD system as well. That's actually really cool looking. I'm still kind of familiarizing my eyes to them. They don't have to be spherical or anything. My early test case was actually having the exact same terrain shape directly above me and spinning overhead. And so currently these guys are all kind of spinning in place, but this main planet here is also spinning. But because my coordinate is relative to it, because my position is relative to this planet, I don't see the planet spinning. I just see the things relative to the planet spinning, if that makes sense. So you could think of these as really low to ground moons. I don't know. But I was really excited I just wanted to be able to have like meteor fields and stuff. So you could like, if I'm going to make this a third person platformer, which is kind of where it's heading at the moment mentally, how I'm thinking of designing it, then you could just be bunny hopping between all these little asteroids and fighting enemies and stuff, and splitting the asteroids in half with your punches. So lots of cool stuff to do with that. Again, still in a very R&D phase. So I still figuring out what I can do. Some of the stuff you see on screen, this might be overkill. I might not be able to do it long term. I probably think I can manage some variant of this. A lot of the reason the frame rate is lower, it took a little bit of a hit with supporting some of the CPU side stuff for supporting lighting. It took a little bit of a hit with that, but I think it's taken an even bigger hit on the GPU with the addition of all this stuff flying around. And there are different approaches I can take. Right now, I'm using one set of shaders for all of this stuff. And what I might wind up doing is using one shader for very large portions of land, and then having another set of shaders for the little guys. So I'm batching all the little guys into single into single groups of memory sent to the GPU, so it's faster. And then this guy is just its own animal and it doesn't have to share resources with these guys, which will cause it to be slow. So that's where that is. Another big thing is the entity system. Wah! A stumpy little block here. It's bouncing, it's colliding with the terrain. Pretty straightforward. Actually getting smooth voxel collision is a little hard. I can't remember exactly how it's done standardly, but I've kind of rigged it to where different axes actually have more priority. And so if I throw this guy down, he's going to tend to want to slide along the Y axis, the XZ plane. So if I shoot him this way, he's going to push up a little. Oh, yeah. It's kind of hard to see. If I'm inside of him, he can't see me. Yeah, so going back to lighting, before, if you haven't seen the previous video, the lighting was very much random looking in a way. I mean, it was sensical, but it just looked like noise, right? Just like Perlin noise with layers. But now it's basically doing ambient occlusion and storing that in memory. Now, at the end of the day, I don't have to actually do, like with what I am rendering now, I don't actually have to store any lighting info in memory. Really, if I wanted to do what I'm doing now, I could just abandon lighting altogether and just have ambient occlusion, which isn't the worst thing in the world. And then I could be doing lighting in the shaders. Like I could have the sun be one source of light, and then I could have flashlights on your character or something. But we'll see. Still early in development. Like torches and stuff doesn't seem to have that much of a use, honestly. I don't know. I'll have to think about it. So not much use for torches that I can think of, really. Like, because everything is so fast-paced. Ooh, we're hitting like 3 frames a second. Yeah, let's stop looking at that. This is what I mean by unoptimized. And part of the reason I delayed is because I wanted to kind of, work on everything, speed things up. But there's a lot of details to be taken care of at this point. A lot of, if I want to do lighting, I really have to think about how I'm going to do it. So with Minecraft, it has lighting that basically it can assume that at some point there's not going to be anything casting a shadow down upon it. And that's a really huge benefit because it means that it doesn't have to do like tons of checking to see, oh, is there a rock overhead? It can just kind of deterministically say at one point, this is my light, and then go all the way down to the bottom of the world, right? Because Minecraft has a predefined height and a predefined depth, and it just kind of goes down top to bottom and says, this is what light is. Right now, I don't have a predefined top and bottom. It's infinite. So casting shadows is going to be a little tricky. If I go up here, things are going to start looking screwy. And let's just say there's a really technical reason for that, but you might see the camera start swirling around, which is kind of hilarious. Yeah, torches. Like, again, if it were Minecraft and everything is like really fine-grained and analytical, like I'm going to place this giant block here and then here and then here. Oh, I need lighting in this small vicinity. Then torches make a lot of sense. But when you're thinking in terms of the scale of planets and stars and things, then having global light sources illuminating everything kind of makes more sense because you don't want a million torches that you're kind of iteratively exploring tiny sections. You are actually just you're lighting giant things at a time based on your current location. You're not necessarily investing a lot in the single places that you explore. So torches, maybe not, but if there are light sources, they need to be very far-reaching, and there would probably be so few of them that I could afford to do it in a very specific and shadery way, rather than like storing all that like light information for every block and kind of predetermining everything. It's hard. It's a hard problem. So for collision, the entities do collide with each other. I don't think I've broken that since I last looked at it. Let's see. Collide. I know you have it in you. Maybe they're not colliding. Collide, darn you. Ooh. Oh, there it goes. Collide. So part of the reason why they don't, yeah, there we go. Part of the reason it's a little weird is because it's actually drawing a box that's bigger than the entity's colliding box, if that makes sense. So they're not actually this big in terms of collision. Yeah, there we go. They're definitely shorter. Now, and so I do have some basic collision, and that's taken some effort. As for getting these things to collide, that's going to be a lot of fun and really challenging. I need to make sure that I've got other things set in stone before I start really tackling that, because saying this giant landmass can collide with that other giant landmass, that's a little, we start getting into some really big issues with that. Because right now, the way that I'm storing terrain information for like this landmass, there's almost nothing global. It's all distributed. It is all like this chunk over here doesn't know about that chunk over there. With collision, it's suddenly you have a desire to like get a giant occ tree or something that represents the entire, basically a data structure that says there are blocks here, here, and here in a very efficient way, in a global sense. But we'll see. I might be able to stick with occ trees on the chunk level. Each 32 by 32 by 64 massive chunks could have an occ tree, and these guys that have occ trees, and then I could do collision with them like you see in a few other games. But mine's really large scale. So that's most of what I've been working on. I've also been thinking a lot more about the macro gameplay, I guess, in terms of space exploration. Like, you know, how are you going to meet different races? You know, should the races be really important to the plot like they were in Star Control 2? Or should the races be more like subsidiary and the plot focuses more on individual characters? And it's a tricky call, because StarCraft 1, I felt, was a game where you had a couple of key characters in the plot, and then you had a whole bunch of like, or a couple of races, like entire civilizations, and each of them have their own like special characters or whatever, but a lot of it has to do with the conflict between those races. So focusing on civilizations kind of has some interesting impacts in terms of how, as a player, I can express power. If I am interacting with a bunch of civilizations, I could be like, hey, entire civilization, do this. Okay, I guess we can do that for you. And if it's, you know, an individual character, then you don't really care unless that character himself holds a lot of power. If all you're thinking about is power. At the same time, individual characters, they don't necessarily confer more, but they generally confer a lot more personality. When you have Star Control 2 and you have like every individual race, the entire race has a very distinct personality, which is pretty cool, and you can do some hilarious things with that. This entire race is a bunch of miserly slobs. This entire race is really lazy. You know, that sort of thing. One of the, if I have to have any agendas for what I'd want to like convey with the plot, it would definitely be basically the idea of the state, like centralized power taken by force, the idea of, you know, stealing from others to accumulate wealth as a force of nature, and just kind of seeing that throughout the galaxy as you encounter different civilizations. That seems really interesting to me, and I feel like you could convey a lot of meaningful things with that without necessarily being preachy. Though I think if you present it in that way, it seems a lot more objective and a lot less preachy, honestly. You know, like I would definitely, in a way, I would kind of want to target the game in a Pixar kind of way, where it's like definitely kids could play it. It almost has a cartoonish, it definitely has a cartoonish look, but it would be, the subject matter could be universally applicable, and as an adult, you would recognize more depth as you played it. I think that's a really solid approach, and that's what a lot of, I feel like a lot of media has done in the past, and they don't do it as much anymore. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, the ability to interact with races combined with the fact that you're basically a demigod in terms of power and you have the personality of a child, I think could lead to some really interesting interactions. And you're not just a child, you're also, you're growing up over the course of the game. And so being able to kind of take you through those different stages of life and how you treat different races and how they kind of treat you, perhaps using their authority to sway you when they shouldn't, which is something personally I think is horrible. People do it all the time. Oh, man. So what have we talked about? We've talked about lighting. We've talked about collision. We've talked about plot and game development. I mean, I should probably talk more about how I might want to do combat, and I'm open to suggestions on this one, because I think a lot more about the plot and kind of the macro mechanics. As you're traveling through space, you're managing resources and assessing risk. Like in Star Control 2, you would look at a planet and you'd be like, hey, is this planet safe to land on? I don't know. It's got like a million tornadoes on it, but maybe I won't get hit by a tornado. And so there's this constant risk assessment, and you'll go way out into the galaxy in order to get something. And you're like, I don't know if I have enough fuel to get back to my planet. Maybe I'll find someone who sells me fuel. I don't know. And so it's this constant, there's risk involved. It's not like major risk, but it's enough to where there is an intangible, unknown future in front of you, and you're constantly making decisions to try and influence it and kind of haggling with it. And that, to me, has a lot of appeal just innately. I mean, that's a lot of what goes into board game design, if I'm not mistaken, is just having players make decisions that are quantifiable in one sense, but ultimately not quantifiable depending on the things that other players would do in the board game or just chance. I definitely think emergent things are always better than just pure chance, but at the end of the day, like, chance is kind of influencing things in the background if you have a procedural system. Other things I've thought about doing, one thing I still need to do, these blocks, if you saw the last video, were kind of like all up in the sky, wiggling around. They were, basically, these are going to form most likely the limbs and body parts of animals and characters in the game as just a basic rendering component, because it fits in with the whole voxel theme, so why not? Now, straight up cubes can have a place, but I probably should have done this before the video, but I need to, basically, I can distort whatever shape I want to as long as it's universally applied. So I can have like a few key shapes, like not just cubes, but I could have a sphere. I could have something that's like half cube, like a cube interpolated with a sphere. And so you get kind of a round cubish thing that might look really good if you're using it to build models and stuff. But there's a lot of things you can do with that. And one of the concerns in the long term is, how am I going to make this accessible? How am I going to make it very easy for me to create models, or for other people to create models? Do I want it to be data driven, or do I want to code everything in code like Minecraft? That's a tough question. It sounds like it's not tough, like, oh, you need to make it data driven. That's how people always do it. But what I've noticed with Java is it's very much an efficient language to, what's the word I'm looking for? To iterate with. When you are in Java, you can code something and then recompile your program very quickly. Like, if I look at this boulder and I'm like, oh, this boulder isn't big enough, I can just close it out, change a number in code, press a button, rerun it again, the boulder's bigger. Wow, congratulations, me. But in a language like C++, on a very large project, it can take a very long time to recompile everything. And so from a development standpoint, it sucks a lot. And at that point, you make things data-driven because compiling is so slow. And so if I were to get a designer or two on this game, I would strongly consider just saying, look, do everything in Java. Kind of how to program. That's good enough. And that means that there is not this giant wall between designer and coder, which I feel it's almost like saying, all right, you paint the art, I think of what to paint. Like, no, it doesn't. I mean, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to have that. The person who thinks of an idea has the most incentive and the most passion about actually implementing it. And so you don't have that huge barrier of separation that could only be fostered by large teams. Well, maybe not a large team, but having enough people to, have a communication barrier. It's complicated. So, yeah. Other things to talk about. I've been doing a lot of music. I've already put up I put up 2 songs so far, one at the end of the last video and one just independently that I just played in guitar, and you should totally go check that out if you haven't. I like to think I'm a good guitarist. I'm just saying, I like to think. But I've been playing guitar, singing, and writing for a very long time, and I think you would really like that song if you went and listened to it. It's very much classical, and yet childish. I was kind of trying to capture this childish take on space exploration, and that song in particular would very much be for like a starting zone or a starting peaceful area or just like an overworld theme. So very peaceful yet busy in a way. So like almost like Kakariko Village or something. I don't know. Yeah, I'm running out of stuff to talk about. I need to implement gravity for these things, which is going to be interesting. I don't know if I'm going to need to have some kind of a large overarching oct tree to support that. Or if I'll be able to use, I already have the space simulator, and maybe I can reuse some of the gravity stuff from that with this without duplicating things, because duplicating code sucks. Yeah. And so that's kind of where this is going. Next video I make, which I'm not saying will be in a week. I don't like to say that because my incentives for this don't need to be, I need a weekly video update. Oh my gosh, I need to make something new in the game. What I really want is just to make whatever I need to make for the game itself, and then the updates just to keep you informed and interested. So the updates are subsidiary, and at that point, I might not want to make an update every week. Maybe every 2 weeks, and maybe I could throw stuff in between if I can. So next time I update, there will very likely be gravity, because that's kind of what's drawn my interest right now and what I can kind of do with what I have. I might take a swing at collision with these giant spheres and the ground and each other. What else might I do? I might have like an actual, instead of flying around with this, camera, which is also an entity in the game world now. It's not just hacked in. It's like literally an object. I might also have like an actual character that I run around with, and maybe I could have a few basic, like I can jump really far and I can do stuff. Maybe to edit terrain. Like honestly, as far along as I am with this, I need to have some terrain editing. It's like I've coded stuff for it, but I haven't thoroughly tested it. It's not too huge a deal. I don't think there shouldn't be too much to get that working so with Minecraft, the big thing with editing blocks that's complicated is the interface by which you edit blocks, right? If I just have some code that says set these blocks to this, that's really easy. But with Minecraft, it's complicated because you don't just click something, you like click and hold, and it's dependent on all the tools you might have on your character and all sorts of stuff. And so mining and punching blocks in trees just kind of becomes a very large, it would be a large programming task in that case. Also, having things like explosions and stuff is a little more complicated in my system, because the way Minecraft approached things was simpler and less error prone in a way. But it was really friggin' slow, because every time in code you would do something to access a block, it would run a million checks. But if you're iterating over something and you're like trying to generate a dungeon, it would have to do a whole bunch of like checks for every block you placed. And that was very costly and not necessary, because you can do those checks once per chunk as opposed to once per block. Yep, I think I've rambled enough. If you like what you see and you want to see me, you just want to keep up with me and what I'm working on with Nebulous Rax and any music I make, if you want to see updates and you want to inspire me, you inspire me, then you can like and subscribe, and you can tell your friends and your family and your loved ones and your grandma that I'm working on this project and that it's really cool, and that there are a lot of blocks, and there will be space exploration and time travel and all sorts of cool things. Intentionally not gonna reveal the time travel stuff much yet, but yeah. So it's been fun. See y'all.